Work for the National Park Service. Not in the capacity most people imagine. I'm not a ranger greeting families at trailhead kiosks or giving campfire talks about black bears. I'm a field logistics coordinator for search and rescue operations in the Pacific Northwest, specifically the Mount Baker-Snoqualmie corridor. My job is numbers, grid squares, elevation contours, estimated travel distances per hour based on terrain class and weather variables. I plot probable drift patterns for lost hikers. I coordinate radio channels between ground teams and aviation. I sit in a command trailer and stare at topographic maps and try to reduce human panic to geometry. I'm good at it, or I was good at it. I'm not sure what I am now. In October of last year, 3-day hikers went missing on a trail system east of Darrington, Washington. This is not unusual. The area is dense second-growth timber with seasonal fog that reduces visibility to arm's length, steep drainages that funnel people downhill into box canyons, and cell coverage that drops to nothing within a mile of most trailheads. People get lost there every year. Usually we find them within 48 hours, hypothermic and embarrassed, huddled under a space blanket they remembered to pack, or sitting beside a creek they followed downhill, hoping it would reach a road. The 3 hikers, 2 women and 1 man, a couple and the woman's college friend visiting from Minnesota, had signed the trail register at 9:40 a.m. on a Saturday. Their car was still in the lot when a volunteer trail maintenance crew arrived the following morning. Standard call-out. I was in the command post by noon Sunday, plotting search zones while ground teams moved out along the primary trail and 2 adjacent drainages. We found them Monday afternoon. All 3 were standing. I need to say that clearly because the initial reports were confused, and the internal documentation still uses the word located without elaboration, which is a bureaucratic habit I now find obscene. We did not find 3 bodies lying in the forest. We did not find 3 people sitting or crouching or collapsed. Ground Team 4, working a drainage roughly 2 miles east of the trail system and 600 feet below the ridge, pushed through a thicket of vine maple into a narrow clearing, and the 3 hikers were standing upright, motionless, in the middle of it. They were dead. The team leader, a woman named Carla Fenn, who has 19 years of SAR experience, radioed back to command. I was the one who took the call. Her voice was flat, which was how I knew something was very wrong, because normally when a team finds subjects alive or dead, there's an emotional register, relief, grief, urgency. Carla's voice had none of that. She said, "Logistics Team 4, we have the 3 subjects. They are 10-7. 10-7 means out of service. It means dead, in the field." Then she said, "They're standing up." I asked her to repeat. "They are standing, upright. They're dead and they're standing upright." I asked if she meant they were propped against something, trees, a rock face. She said no. She said they were standing in the open, unassisted. She said she wasn't going to say anything else on the radio and asked me to get the operations chief on a phone line. I drove out there. I shouldn't have. My role is command post, not field. But the operations chief was already en route, and I rode with him, and we hiked the 1.5 miles down the drainage because the alternative was sitting in the trailer with what Carla Fenn had told me and doing nothing. The brush was so thick in places we had to turn sideways. The light was dim. The canopy there is unbroken, Douglas fir and western red cedar. And in October, the sun angle means the drainage floor gets maybe 40 minutes of direct light per day. When we reached the clearing, the 4 members of Ground Team 4 were standing at the perimeter. Nobody was near the bodies. Carla was smoking a cigarette, which I had never seen her do in the field. She's a paramedic. She looked at the operations chief and said, "I don't have an explanation. I'm not going to guess." The three hikers were roughly 8 feet apart from each other, not in a line, more like a loose triangle. They were upright. Their feet were flat on the ground. Their arms were at their sides. Their eyes were open. They were facing. And this is what I can't stop thinking about. What I have not stopped thinking about for 7 months. They were all facing the same direction. Northwest. Not exactly. Maybe 320 degrees on a compass bearing. All three of them, oriented identically, within a degree or two of variation, facing the deep timber on the far side of the clearing. The operations chief, Dave Matusik, walked a slow circle around them at about 10 feet distance. He didn't touch anything. He came back and stood next to me and said very quietly, "Their legs are stiff, full rigor mortis, but rigor mortis doesn't keep you standing. Anyone who's worked with the dead knows this. Rigor locks the joints, yes, but a stiff body is still subject to gravity. It falls. It falls in whatever position it died in. It does not stand in a clearing in the woods like a statue." The county medical examiner was brought in by helicopter that evening. By then, temporary tarps had been erected around the clearing, and the bodies had been photographed from every conceivable angle. I watched the ME's face when she first saw them. She was a composed woman in her 50s, and the look that crossed her face was not shock exactly. It was closer to insult, as though the scene were personally offensive to her understanding of how the world operated. The cause of death was hypothermia. All three. Straightforward, unambiguous hypothermia, consistent with an overnight exposure in temperatures that dropped to 31 degrees. No trauma, no toxicology findings, no animal predation. Their gear was found in their day packs, neatly organized extra layers they hadn't put on, food they hadn't eaten. They died of cold on a night when they had warm clothing in their packs and didn't use it. And they died standing up, facing 320 degrees. I should have let it go. The case was closed administratively within a week. Hypothermia with unusual post-mortem positioning. The ME's report used that phrase, unusual post-mortem positioning, which is a masterpiece of understatement that I think about almost daily. The families were told their loved ones got lost, succumbed to exposure, and were found in the field. No one lied. No one told the full truth either. But I have access to historical case files. This is the part where I need to be careful about what I say, because I still work for the Park Service and I signed documents when I took this job, and those documents have legal weight. But I'm going to describe what I found in general terms, because I think someone needs to know this, and I think the act of telling it might be the only thing that keeps me from driving out to that drainage and walking into the trees myself. I started pulling historical SAR reports for the region, not just our forest, the entire North Cascades corridor, going back to the digitized records from the early 1990s. Before that, I requested archival boxes from the regional office in Portland, which required a form and a stated reason and a supervisor signature. And I put down procedural review for updated lost person behavior modeling, which is a real thing I occasionally do and which no one questioned. I was looking for other cases of unusual body positioning. I found 4. The first was from 1997. A solo male hiker, 53, experienced, well-equipped, missing for 6 days in the Boulder River wilderness, found standing at the edge of a creek, dead, hypothermia, facing according to the reporting ranger's compass measurement, which he included almost as an afterthought, a detail that clearly bothered him enough to document, but not enough to flag for anyone else, 318 degrees. The second was from 2004. Two teenage boys, brothers, who went off trail in the Glacier Peak wilderness during a family camping trip, missing for 3 days, found standing in a meadow above the tree line, 18 inches apart, shoulder to shoulder, dead. Hypothermia. One was found facing 322 degrees, the other 319. The third was from 2011. A woman, 41, trail runner, reported missing when she didn't return to her car by nightfall. Found the next morning, standing in the middle of a decommissioned logging road, hands at her sides. Dead. Hypothermia, though the overnight temperature had only dropped to 44 degrees, and she was wearing appropriate layers, facing 320 degrees. The fourth was from 2019. A couple in their 60s, experienced hikers, reported overdue from a permitted overnight trip, found standing in their campsite side by side, tents still erected and sleeping bags laid out inside, dead. Hypothermia, facing 321 degrees. 10 people across 27 years, all found standing. All facing the same compass bearing within a 4-degree window. All dead of hypothermia. All in possession of adequate gear they hadn't used. All in the same broad geographic corridor, a stretch of the North Cascades, roughly 40 miles long and 15 miles wide. I made a map. I pinned each location. The pins didn't form a line or a circle or any geometric pattern I could identify. They were scattered across the corridor irregularly. But when I drew the bearing from each pin, when I extended a line at 320 degrees from each recovery site, every line converged in roughly the same area. A region of old-growth forest in the upper Sauk River drainage. No trails, no roads, not even decommissioned logging roads. The topographic map showed a series of steep, heavily timbered ridges with no named features. The land management designation was unroaded wilderness character, which means it has no special protection. It's just that nobody has ever bothered to build anything there because there's no economic reason to access it. I requested the aerial survey imagery for that area. We have regular flights for fire detection and watershed monitoring. The imagery goes back to 2008 in high resolution. I told the GIS specialist I needed it for search probability modeling, which again was plausible enough that she pulled the files without comment. There is nothing visible in the imagery. The canopy is unbroken. Old-growth Douglas fir and western red cedar, trees 200 feet tall and 8 feet in diameter. A canopy so dense you cannot see the ground from the air. There could be anything under there. There could be a building. There could be a city you wouldn't know. I don't know why I'm telling you that. Like, it matters. There's no building. There's no city. I know that rationally. But I'm telling you what the map looks like, this convergence point, hidden under a canopy that no one has ever looked beneath, because that's what my mind keeps returning to. What is at 320 degrees? What were they facing? What were they looking at in the moment they stopped moving and stopped putting on their jackets and stopped eating and just stood there in the cold and died? I need to tell you about the interview now. After I found the 4 historical cases, I identified the team leaders for each recovery. 2 had retired. 1 had died unrelated, a car accident in 2016. But 1 was still active. His name is Miguel Reyes. He recovered the solo hiker in 1997, the first case in my sequence. He's been with SAR for 31 years. He's a quiet man, mid-50s, deeply competent. We've worked together on dozens of operations. I asked him to have coffee with me. We sat in a diner in Darrington, one of those places that still has Formica countertops and a bell over the door. I asked him if he remembered the 97 case. The man found standing by the creek. Miguel set his coffee down very carefully. He didn't look at me. He looked at the window, at the mountains visible beyond the town, the foothills of the Cascades going blue-green in the distance. And he said, "I wondered when someone else was going to find that file." I asked him what he meant. He said he'd reported the positioning to his supervisor at the time. He said his supervisor had listened, written something down, and told him it would be handled. Then Miguel never heard about it again. He asked once, about 6 months later, and his supervisor said it was handled and looked at him in a way that ended the conversation. That supervisor retired in 2003. Miguel said he'd thought about it over the years, but had decided it wasn't his business to pursue. He said he was a ground searcher, not an investigator, and that some things were above his role. Then I told him about the other cases, the convergence, the bearing. Miguel was quiet for a long time. The diner was mostly empty mid-afternoon, between lunch and dinner. The fluorescent lights above us buzzed faintly, the way they do when one tube is starting to go. A truck passed on the highway outside, and the windows rattled slightly in their frames. He picked up his coffee, put it back down without drinking. "There's something I didn't put in my report," he said. I waited. When I found him, the man by the creek, I was alone. My teammate was 200 meters back, working through some blowdown, so I was alone when I first saw him. He was standing with his back to me, facing the creek, and I called out to him because he was standing. He looked alive. I called out and he didn't respond, and I came around to his front, and well, he wasn't alive. He stopped, drank his coffee this time. A long swallow. But the thing I didn't report is that before I came around to his front, when I was still behind him, I heard something across the creek, in the trees on the other side. "What did you hear?" "Nothing." I didn't understand. I said so. "That's the problem," Miguel said. "I heard nothing. The creek was running. There should have been creek sound. Loud creek sound. It was October. The rains had started. That creek was running hard. But when I was standing behind him, looking in the direction he was looking, the creek sounds stopped. All sounds stopped. For maybe 5 seconds, complete silence. Not quiet silence. The kind that isn't natural. The kind that feels like something pressed its hand over your ears." He was gripping his coffee mug with both hands. And then it came back. The sound came back. And I walked around to his front, and he was dead, and that was that. I asked him which direction the man had been facing. "Away from the trail, toward the interior, deeper in." I asked him if he'd felt anything anomalous. I felt like I was being watched from the direction he was facing, and I felt like if I looked too long in that direction, I wouldn't stop looking. We sat there for a while. The fluorescent light above us flickered once, recovered, buzzed on. I should have stopped there. I know that now. I should have closed the files, gone back to my actual job, coordinated my grid squares, plotted my probability zones, and left the convergence point as an abstraction on a map. A curiosity, an anomaly for someone else, someone with authority, resources, institutional mandate to investigate. But you need to understand my situation. I am 44 years old. I have been divorced for 3 years. I live alone in a studio apartment in Everett that smells like the Indian restaurant below it, regardless of what I do about ventilation. My job is important, and I am good at it, but it is, ultimately, a job of coordinates and logistics and radio calls, and I go home at the end of a deployment to an empty apartment and eat standing up at my kitchen counter and fall asleep watching television I won't remember in the morning. I'm not depressed, or I don't think I am, but I'm aware, in the way you become aware in your mid-40s, that my life has taken on a quality of repetition that I didn't choose and don't know how to interrupt. The search for missing people is, for me, the only time I feel fully present. The urgency of it, the sense that something actually matters in a time-limited way. I need you to understand that when I say I couldn't stop, I don't mean I was brave. I mean I had nothing else. In March, I took 5 days of leave. I told my supervisor I was visiting my sister in Boise, which is a lie. My sister lives in Boise, but I haven't visited her in 2 years, and she'd be confused if I showed up. I packed a full backcountry kit: tent, stove, food for 6 days, GPS unit, satellite communicator, rain gear, layers for temperatures down to 15 degrees. I packed it with the same precision I bring to my professional work. I told no one where I was going. I drove to a Forest Service road that dead ends roughly 7 miles from the convergence point. The road was gated seasonal closure, not decommissioned, and I parked at the gate and started walking at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. The weather was overcast, mid-40s, light rain. Standard March conditions for the west side of the Cascades. The road was in decent shape for the first 2 miles: potholes, some slide debris, but walkable. Then it degraded. Alder had grown in thickly, and in places I was pushing through branches that formed a tunnel. The surface was more moss than gravel. No tire tracks, no boot prints, no sign anyone had been out here in years. The rain collected on the alder leaves and dropped in fat, cold beads down the back of my neck. After the road truly ended, dissolving into a wash of cobbles where a creek had reclaimed it, I was on game trails and intuition. The terrain was steep, side-hilling across slopes of 30, 35 degrees with nothing but rotten blowdown and salal and sword fern. The old-growth canopy above was so thick that the rain mostly didn't reach me directly. It filtered down through layers of branches and moss and hit the ground as a constant, fine mist. The light was green and dim. The silence was enormous. I want to be precise about the silence because of what Miguel told me. This was not the anomalous silence he described. This was the natural silence of deep old-growth forest on a wet day, a silence composed of small sounds, dripping water, the creak of wood, the occasional call of a varied thrush, that strange single-note whistle that sounds like a pipe organ playing one key in a cathedral. It was quiet, but it was alive. I made camp the first night on a small bench above a creek, roughly 4 miles from the convergence point. I cooked, ate, hung my food, got in my tent. The rain intensified after dark. It drummed on the tent fly with a consistency that was almost mechanical. I lay in my sleeping bag and listened and thought about the 3 hikers we'd found in October, standing in their clearing, facing 320, while the October cold took everything from them, and they didn't even unzip their packs. I slept, but not well. The second day I traveled 3 more miles. The terrain worsened. I was in a drainage now, following a creek upstream toward the ridgeline where my map showed the convergence point. The creek banks were choked with devil's club, that plant unique to the Pacific Northwest, with leaves the size of dinner plates and stems covered in hair-thin spines that break off in your skin and fester. I wore leather gloves and still ended the day with dozens of spines in my forearms. The forest here was primeval. Cedars 12 feet in diameter, their bases fluted and buttressed, rising into the canopy like columns in a structure built for something larger than human worship. Moss hung from every surface. The ground was so thick with decomposing wood and vegetation that my boots sank 4 or 5 inches with every step. I was close now, maybe a mile from where the bearing lines converged on my map. And here's where I have to tell you what changed. It was mid-afternoon. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still locked in gray, and under the canopy, the light was so dim, I could have believed it was dusk. I was climbing a steep slope, grabbing roots and the bases of saplings to pull myself up, when I became aware of a sound, or rather, the absence of one. The creek below me had been audible all day, a constant white noise, the rush and tumble of snowmelt over rocks. It was my orientation anchor. I could always hear where I was relative to it. It stopped, not faded, stopped, like a recording cut off mid-note. I stood on the slope with one hand wrapped around a root and listened. The dripping had stopped too. The wind there had been a faint movement of air was gone. The thrush that had been calling intermittently all afternoon was silent. Everything was silent. The silence Miguel described. Not an absence of sound, but a presence, a pressure. Something leaning against my eardrums from the outside. It lasted, I don't know. I lost the ability to track time in those seconds. It could have been 5 seconds or 30. My body was locked, not frozen in fear locked the way a prey animal locks. Total muscular stillness. I wasn't deciding not to move. I was incapable of deciding anything. My thoughts were present but suspended, like objects in gelatin. And during that silence, I became aware that I was facing a specific direction. I had been climbing the slope at a diagonal heading northeast, roughly. But during the silence, my head had turned. My body was still oriented upslope, but my head was turned to the left, and I was looking through the trees to the northwest. 3:20. I was looking at 3:20. I hadn't decided to turn my head. I couldn't remember the moment of turning, but I was looking. Through the trees in that direction, there was nothing. Forest. More old growth. The slope continued up, and then presumably crested the ridge and dropped into the next drainage. There was nothing to see. But I was looking with an intensity that frightened me, the kind of focused attention you give to something you've identified as a threat. My eyes were working to resolve something in the green darkness between the trunks. Working hard, the way they do when there's almost enough light to see, but not quite. Then the creak came back. Sound returned, all of it, at once, like a door opening. The rain started again. A thrush called. I was shaking. My hand on the root was white-knuckled. I turned my head deliberately back toward the slope above me, and it took effort. Genuine physical effort, like turning against a current. I climbed. I kept going. I'm going to tell you why, and you're going to think I'm stupid or reckless or self-destructive, and maybe all of those things are true. But the reason I kept going is this. In that moment of silence, when my head had turned and I was looking at 3:20, I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt that I mattered to something, that something in the world was aware of me specifically, had selected me, found me relevant. It was the most personal attention I'd received from anything human or otherwise in longer than I want to admit. I kept climbing. The ridge crest was another 800 feet of elevation gain. I reached it in the last hour of usable light. The ridgetop was narrow, maybe 15 feet wide, with the canopy slightly thinner, a few gaps where I could see gray sky above. I stood on the crest and looked down the other side. Below me was a drainage, steeper than the one I'd climbed. The creek at the bottom was invisible under the canopy. I could hear it, faintly, after the sound had returned. The drainage was uniformly forested, uniformly dark. There was nothing visible, no structures, no clearings, no anomalies of any kind. Just forest descending into shadow. But the convergence point, according to my GPS, was approximately half a mile ahead and 600 feet below me, down in that drainage. I made camp on the ridge. I told myself this was practical. The ridge was drier, flatter, more sheltered from the wind that funneled up the drainages at night. And those things were true. But I also chose the ridge because it was the boundary. I was on top and the convergence point was below, and as long as I stayed on top, I hadn't fully committed to anything. That night was the worst night. The rain stopped around 9 p.m. The sky didn't clear. The overcast remained, but the rain stopped, and with it the drumming on my tent fly that had served as ambient noise. The silence that replaced it was the natural kind. Forest silence, composed of small sounds. But I lay in my sleeping bag and listened to those small sounds with a vigilance that wouldn't let me sleep. Sometime after midnight, my watch said 12:40. I heard a new sound, below me, in the drainage I hadn't descended into. I don't know how to describe this. I've spent months trying to find the right words. It was like a hum, but not mechanical, not electrical. It was tonal, a single low frequency, at the very bottom edge of what I can perceive as sound. It might have been below true hearing. I might have been feeling it as much as hearing it. It was steady, unwavering. It didn't pulse or fluctuate. It was just there, like a note held indefinitely on an instrument with infinite breath. I lay still and listened to it for, according to my watch, 2 hours and 15 minutes. In that time, 4 things happened. First, I became very warm, not metaphorically, physically warm. My sleeping bag was rated to 20 degrees. The outside temperature was probably 35. I should have been comfortable, but not hot. But I began to sweat, my face, my chest, my back. A deep, radiating warmth that seemed to come from inside me, rather than from any external source. Second, I became very calm. The vigilance I'd been maintaining dissolved. Not into sleep, I was wide awake, but into a state of passive receptivity, alert but not anxious, present but not resistant. It felt the way I imagine certain drugs feel, though I have no basis for comparison. Third, I began to cry, silently, without decision. Tears running down the sides of my face into my sleeping bag hood, not from sadness or fear, from something else, recognition, maybe. The way you cry when you hear a piece of music that seems to describe your exact interior state, that sense of being known, being described, being seen by something that didn't need you to explain yourself. Fourth, I became aware that I wanted to get up, unzip my bag, unzip my tent, walk down the slope, walk toward the sound, walk to 320, stand there, face the sound, let it look at me, let whatever was down there see me fully, the way it had started to see me on the slope that afternoon. Let it finish seeing me. I wanted this the way you want water when you're dehydrated, the way you want sleep when you've been awake for 3 days. A need so fundamental it didn't feel like desire. It felt like correction. Like my body was finally being told what it was supposed to do. I did not get up. I'm going to tell you why. And it's not courage. It's not survival instinct. It's not rationality overcoming something irrational. It's because I thought about the woman, the trail runner, 2011, the one who died of hypothermia on a night that was 44 degrees, wearing appropriate layers. She was found standing on a logging road. She had appropriate layers on. She wasn't undressed. She hadn't succumbed to paradoxical undressing, which is a common late-stage hypothermia behavior. She was dressed for the cold. She should not have died. But she was standing there, facing 320, dead. And I thought, the cold didn't kill her. The standing killed her. The standing still in one place, long enough for 44 degrees to pull enough heat from a motionless body to end its functioning. She wasn't lost. She wasn't confused. She was looking at something, and she couldn't stop looking, and her body's thermoregulation couldn't sustain a motionless posture long enough for her to be done looking. Whatever she was being shown, whatever she was seeing, took longer to see than a human body can survive while standing still in 44 degrees. And I thought, if I get up and walk down there, I will stand, and I will not stop standing. And it is 35 degrees tonight, and I will die facing 320, and someone will find me probably not for a long time, given that no one knows I'm here. And I will be another pin on a map that no one is making except me. That thought was enough, barely. It was enough the way a single bolt holds a structure that should have 4 bolts technically sufficient, loudly strained. I did not sleep. I lay in my tent and listened to the hum until it stopped, which was at 4:55 a.m. according to my watch. It didn't fade. It was there, and then it wasn't, in the space between one breath and the next. The forest sounds returned the pre-dawn rustling, a thrush beginning its first hesitant notes. The warmth faded from my body. The calm drained out. What replaced it was not fear exactly. It was grief. The specific grief of something being taken away that you never should have been given. I broke camp at first light. I did not descend into the drainage. I went back the way I'd come. Down the slope, through the Devil's Club, along the creek, back to the dead-end road. I walked fast, too fast for the terrain. I fell twice, once hard enough to bruise my hip badly. I didn't care. I wanted distance. I was back at my car by mid-afternoon. I drove home. I sat in my apartment above the Indian restaurant and stared at the wall for 3 hours. Then I ate a bowl of cereal and went to bed and slept for 14 hours. That was March. It is now May, and I have to tell you what has happened since, because it hasn't stopped. It followed me, not the way a predator follows, not the way a haunting follows in a story. It followed me the way a frequency follows you when you've been tuned to it, when you've heard it once. Your ears know it exists, and they find it in ambient noise where they never would have detected it before. 3 weeks after I came back, I was in the command trailer during an unrelated SAR operation, an elderly man with dementia who'd wandered from a campground, and I was looking at the topographic map on the wall. The map covered our entire operational area, and I noticed for the first time that I always face northwest when I'm working. My desk in the trailer is oriented so that I face the southeast wall, but when I'm plotting a search area or calculating drift patterns, I turn my chair. I'd never noticed this. But I tested it over the next week, paying attention to my body's orientation when my mind was occupied. When I was thinking about something else, when my conscious attention was absorbed in work or television or cooking or brushing my teeth, my body oriented northwest. 320. Every time. I have tested this with a compass. I purchased a small orienteering compass, and I keep it in my pocket now. When I notice myself standing or sitting with my mind elsewhere, I check 315, 322, 318, 320. Always within that window, my body is pointing at the convergence point like a needle pointing north. It's not constant. It's not compulsive in a way that interferes with functioning. I can face any direction I choose when I'm consciously directing my body. But the moment my attention drifts, the moment I'm absorbed in thought, or drowsy, or distracted, I rotate. Slowly, imperceptibly, the way a plant turns toward light over the course of a day. I orient. I haven't told anyone. What would I tell them? That I have an unconscious postural preference for northwest? That I went into the woods and heard a sound and now my body points at it? I'd be evaluated. I'd be removed from duty. And this is the part I'm not proud of. I don't want it to stop. I know what that sounds like. I know it sounds like the beginning of the trajectory that ends with me standing in a clearing somewhere. I know. I sit with that knowledge every day. I check the weather forecast and I calculate how cold it would have to be for a motionless body to die of hypothermia at various elevations in the North Cascades. And I compare that to the current conditions, and I tell myself, not yet, not tonight. Tonight the temperatures are too high. Tonight I wouldn't die even if I did walk out there and stand. And on the nights when the temperatures drop late March, early April, those clear, cold nights, I feel the pull intensify, as though it knows, as though the cold is a necessary component, as though whatever is out there can only finish seeing you if the cold is there to hold you still long enough. I have begun to wonder if the victims chose it, if they felt what I felt in that tent, that warmth, that calm, that sense of being recognized and decided it was worth it. If they stood in their clearings and faced 320 and felt, for the first and last time in their lives, the total attention of something vast, and decided that was a fair trade for everything else. I understand the appeal. God help me, I understand it. 2 weeks ago, I found something else in the records. I wasn't looking for it, or maybe I was, in the way that you're always looking once you've been tuned to the frequency. I was reviewing older files, pre-digital, from the archival boxes I'd requested months ago. And in a 1983 SAR report for the Sauk River drainage, a case that was closed as a simple wilderness fatality, I found a hand-drawn map by the recovering ranger. He'd sketched the body's position relative to local landmarks. The body was found lying down, not standing. An older man, 60s, dead of exposure. But in the ranger's sketch, he'd drawn an arrow indicating the direction the man's body was oriented, and in the margin, in pencil that had faded but was still legible, he'd written, "Body oriented head to northwest, same as Larson 79, same as the Ohanapikosh pair, same as others." This has been happening since at least 1979. Probably longer. The ones found standing are the ones who didn't fall. The ones found lying down are the ones whose bodies finally gave out, collapsed, but still oriented, still facing, still looking. How many? How many over 50 years? I've found 10 who were standing, but how many were found lying down, oriented northwest? And it was simply never flagged. How many were chalked up to exposure, to getting lost, to bad luck? How many pins should be on my map? I don't know. I'm not going to look. I'm telling you that directly I am choosing not to look any further, because every piece of information I find makes the convergence point more real, makes it more specific, makes it more like a place I could walk to, and I've already walked most of the way there once. I need to tell you about last week. I was in the field, active SAR operation, a teenager who'd separated from a church youth group on a day hike. Standard call-out. I was in the command trailer, doing my job, plotting search zones, running probability calculations, radio traffic flowing, teams in the field, routine. The teenager was found safe. He'd followed a creek downhill exactly as people are taught and ended up at a road. A passing driver picked him up. Happy ending. We got the radio call and everyone cheered and started the demobilization process. And as I was rolling up my map, I noticed that my hand had drawn something on it. I had not been conscious of drawing. I'd been focused on the radio traffic, on the logistics. But at some point, my hand had picked up a pencil and drawn a line on the topographic map. a straight line from our command post location to the northwest. 320 degrees. The line extended off the edge of the map. I stared at it. The pencil was still in my hand. I looked around the trailer. 2 other people were there, the plan section chief and a radio operator. Neither was looking at me. Neither had noticed. I rolled the map up quickly and took it home with me. I have it here now. The line is real. My hand drew it while my mind was elsewhere. My hand drew the direction while I was focused on saving a boy's life. I'm not losing time. I'm not blacking out. I'm not going insane in any way I can clinically identify. I function. I eat, I sleep, I work, I drive, I have conversations, but underneath all of that, at a level below the level where I make decisions, my body is oriented. It is pointing. It has been pointing since March, and it will not stop pointing. And the question I cannot answer is whether this is a warning or an invitation. There is one more thing I need to tell you, and then I'm going to stop. Last Sunday, I drove to Darrington. Not for work, not to meet anyone. I drove there because it's the closest town to the trailhead where the road begins that leads to the drainage that leads to the convergence point. I parked in the diner parking lot, the same diner where I met Miguel and I sat in my car for 90 minutes. While I was sitting there, a pickup truck pulled in 3 spaces away. A man got out, mid-30s, work boots, Carhartt jacket. He went into the diner, normal, completely normal. But as he walked from his truck to the diner entrance, he passed through my field of vision, and for a moment, maybe 2 seconds, he paused, not stopped, paused, a hitch in his stride, and his head turned slightly, toward the mountains, toward the northwest. Then he kept walking and went inside. I sat in my car, and my heart was pounding and my hands were shaking, and I told myself I was projecting. I was seeing patterns that weren't there. A man turned his head toward the mountains. So what? People look at mountains. It means nothing. But the angle, the pause, the quality of the pause, not a decision to look, but a being caught, a moment of reception, a needle swinging to north and then releasing. How many people in this town? How many in the surrounding area? How many have walked those trails, spent time in those drainages, slept within range of whatever broadcasts from that convergence point on cold nights? How many of them orient without knowing they orient? How many of them carry that bearing in their bodies like a frequency they can't consciously hear? Am I one of hundreds? Am I one of thousands? Does it matter? Does it change anything whether I'm alone in this or surrounded by others who face 320 when they're not paying attention? The teenager, the boy from the church group, the one who was found safe. He'd followed the creek downhill. That's what his youth leader told us, what he told his parents, what went in the report. He followed the creek downhill and hit a road, but I looked at the map. The creek he followed runs roughly south. The road he hit is south of the search area. The route makes sense, except the creek forks. About a mile from where he likely left the trail, the creek forks. The left fork continues south toward the road. The right fork curves northwest. If he'd taken the right fork, if he'd followed it upstream instead of down, it would have led him into the upper Sauk drainage. It would have led him toward the convergence point. He didn't take it. He was found safe. He went home. Happy ending. But I keep thinking about the fork. About a teenage boy, alone, disoriented, standing at a creek fork in the woods. About which direction felt natural. About whether he hesitated. About whether something in him pulled toward the right fork, pulled northwest. And he overrode it, or didn't feel it, or felt it and chose the other way. Or whether he'll feel it later, in a year, in 10 years. In some quiet moment when his mind is elsewhere and his body turns 320 degrees and he doesn't know why. I'm going to stop now. I don't know what I want from telling this. I don't know if I want advice or help or belief or companionship. I think I want one thing. I want to know if you felt it, the pull, the orientation, the sense that somewhere in the deep timber something is facing you, and all it asks is that you face it back. If you felt it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I hope you never walk those trails. I hope you never sleep within range of whatever frequency spills out of the old growth on cold nights. I hope you stay untuned. I'm going back out there. I need to say that plainly. I haven't decided when, but I know I'm going back. The temperatures will drop again in October, November. The pull will intensify. Some night I'll be in my apartment facing 320, and the weight of it will exceed whatever is holding me here. My job, my routine, my thin rational knowledge that standing still in the cold kills you. And I'll drive to Darrington and park at the gate and walk in. I don't think I'll walk out. I'm not frightened by this. That's the part that should scare you. I'm not frightened. The word is grateful. Something in the world noticed me. Something vast and patient and old looked in my direction and found me interesting enough to tune. In a life that has become very small and very quiet and very much the same from one day to the next, that attention is the most meaningful thing I have. I check my compass every morning, 320, still there, still holding, still facing me from across 40 miles of timber and ridge and drainage and silence. I face it back, and I wait for October.